My mic on, and there we go. I think we're live on the Zoom, on the YouTube. I'm waiting for Chloe to give me a thumbs up that she can hear me online. That would be great. So I think you guys on the Zoom can hear me speaking, can't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. And I'm getting very encouraging graph. I've got one of those little LED meters on my live stream software that shows me that my voice is recording on it. So I'm hoping that everybody can hear me on the live stream. So just want to say good evening to you all and welcome to the final session in the Andy Stanley series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. So I'm getting a thumbs up from Chloe on sound, so that's really great. I have really enjoyed this series. I think it's been really well taught, and we've had some superb discussions, and I've been praying about tonight and asking God to kind of step in and be part of our discussion and really guide us in this. So I'm really looking forward to it. So just incredibly briefly, the sessions we've had, the first one was the integrity question. Then we looked at the legacy question. What kind of story do we want to write with our lives? We looked at conscience. Is there a tension that deserves my attention to help us make a good decision? Then Pastor Mark led it for me last week, which is very kind because I had a couple of weeks off. I had a great break as well, so that was really good. I also finished that break up with my birthday at the weekend. That everybody made a fuss of me, so I'm feeling very relaxed and chilled, which was great. And then tonight we're looking at the relationship question, and it's about how would an understanding of the biblical concept of love affect or influence the way in which we make decisions. That's it in a sentence, but we're going to unpack that quite a bit and just want to say hi to a few people on our live streams. I've got my iPad here, and I can see we've got lots and lots of people on there. We've got Phil Thompson is on there. Nice to see you, Phil. Thank you for all your encouraging comments on my running. That's great. Melissa's on there. Linda's on there. Louise Darwood over at City Church East. Nice to see you, Melissa. A few other people on there. That's great. Yeah, we've got about 30 on the YouTube, and I'm just looking on the Facebook. Karen Palmer's on the Facebook. Great to see you, Karen. David Bevis is there. Jen Love's on there. Jen, great to see you. Phil Tucker, great to see you, Phil. So yeah, we've got quite a few people on both of our live streams. So really, really warm welcome to you this evening, to everyone, and also to you guys as well on the Zoom. Abby's going to be hosting for us and playing the video in just a minute, but I'm going to open up with a little bit of a question. And the question is, can you think of a time when love required a lot more of you than you thought at first? Can you think of a time when love, the decision to love, required a lot more of you than you first thought possible? Just throw that out to anybody. I know it's a big question, so go for it if you think you've got an answer. I can think of a couple of things I can throw in there, but I'm sure people can think of something. So, a time when love required a whole lot more of you than you thought.
I would say, Nick, bringing up teenage children. And first of all the things that you have to do with them and transporting them here, there and everywhere, in that sense. So you just become a taxi driver. So there's a lot of actual stuff that you do, but also kind of navigating with them through the difficulties of the teenage years and them, pulling away, and as scary as that can be sometimes. It's not for the faint-hearted, but you have to do it, don't you?
Yeah.
You have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure that somebody is, somebody's going to identify with that, raising kids, either youngsters or, I know, Abby, you've got a little one at home. Are you finding yourself waking up at funny intervals, and what's happening with you?
Yeah, I find myself doing that, just kind of like breaking sleep, really, because you can't have like a continuous sleep anymore, say 7-8 hours. Probably have to be waking up every 2 hours or thereabout, or sometimes every 1 hour. So sometimes you just want to be like, oh, why can't you just sleep? I need to sleep as well. And I think that's where love comes, because at the end of the day, baby needs to eat, isn't it? yeah, that's the thing. And for me, it just kind of made me appreciate my parents more in terms of what they did for me. And I kind of get what Catherine was saying as well, because sometimes I just think, oh, what's wrong with my mom? Yeah, it's normal. I didn't ask you to bring me into this world anyway. You just have to love me either way. But now I just have to, like, being in that position as a parent now makes me understand that, oh, really? That love is about sacrifice, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I totally identify with both of those things. I think I can recall, when there was a stage in my family where we had George, Simon, and Adam, and they were kind of all under 6. And, like on a Sunday afternoon after church, there was a little bit of bargaining going on as to who could have the 2 hour sleep without being interrupted, and that they would shield the other parent, and the other parent would be on duty, and you'd swap over. So, yeah, I think all of us probably can identify with the concept of almost like being drawn into a situation where you feel love is the right response to be bringing, of course, but then it almost like kind of pulls more and more out of you, or more than you perhaps thought you knew you were going to give in advance. But that's a good thing, I mean, people need us sometimes, don't they? And we need to put stuff into people, and sometimes it's that very ability to put things into people that rescues them and keeps them on track and helps them live a better life. So tonight's session is all about it's kind of the one that marks itself out as it's a decision that affects other people. It's the decision-making consideration that's much more about. It says here one of the things he says is that it's about making someone else's life better and potentially making the world better as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into the session from Andy. Now listen closely, because he says such great things in this session. I made loads of notes. we've got Chloe who's doing some online pastoring for us, and she's got some of these sound bites that are just great things that he says in her email. So she's going to copy and paste some of those in, hopefully. And yeah, we'll go from there, and then we'll have a great discussion afterwards. So I'm just going to open in prayer before we do that, and then we'll go with the video. Lord God, I just thank you for tonight's session, and I pray that it's super, super helpful for people. I pray that it helps them. I pray that it lasts in their mind. I pray that it informs some of their decision making in a strong way. And I pray that your Holy Spirit would really help us tonight to have a great discussion around this area. Thank you, Lord God. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. Go for it, Abby. If you'd like to share the screen, and I'll open that up on our live stream as well. I think we're a bit low on sound. We're a bit low on sound, I think, Abby.
Welcome back.
Oh, we're good. We're good.
No, this is our final session together. So I want to pause and say thank you for inviting me into your group. And more importantly, thank you for setting aside some time to talk about one of the most important topics you can talk about, and that is decision making. Now, as we've reiterated through our time together, life is all about decision making, and your decisions determine the direction and quality of your life. And as we've said throughout our sessions together, good decisions require good questions. And of course, we're saying 5 in particular. And in this session, we're going to unpack our final question, the relationship question. By now, it should be clear that the thing that makes these questions clarifying also has the potential to make them a bit terrifying. And I say terrifying because, well, we usually know the answers to these questions before we even finish asking the questions, right? And once we know, we can't unknow. And once we know, we feel accountable. Now, our 5th and final question may be the most clarifying and thus the most terrifying question of all. This will probably be the question you're most tempted not to ask and not to answer honestly. So once again, a disclaimer, you don't have to do anything with your answer, but you owe it to yourself to know the answer, right? What you won't know can hurt you. And in the case of our final question, what you don't know or refuse to know has the potential to hurt you, or you have the potential to hurt the most in your most cherished relationships. Now, when you think about your future, you don't envision yourself alone, right? I mean, when you think about your future, there's somebody beside you, and perhaps that somebody is already beside you. Our final question will help you keep them there. In fact, this question has the potential to enhance the quality of every single one of your relationships. It has the power to restore and heal broken relationships. It has the power to rekindle romance, to restore what was lost. But before the big reveal, another disclaimer. Unlike our other 4 questions, this question does not come with a guaranteed ROI, return on investment. There may be no tangible, measurable, or even noticeable returns with this one. And the reason is this. Our final question is not about making your life better. It's about making someone else's life better, which may make your life better. But, and this is the payoff, our final question positions you to make the world better. So, here we go. Throughout Jesus' ministry, he hinted that something new was on the horizon, something designed to replace much of what was in place in first century Judaism. And all of his hints, his parables, his insinuations were designed to create a sense of expectation in the minds and the hearts of his first century followers. So when he entered Jerusalem for his final visit and what would be his final Passover meal, crowds lined the streets to welcome him. Their expectations were political, regal, messianic. They knew something was up, and he had their undivided attention, but they did not understand his ultimate intention. So on the night of his arrest, he gathers with his 12 apostles for what would be a final Passover meal, and he made his intentions clear, crystal clear. To begin with, he announced that he was leaving, and that was a downer and was confusing. I mean, why would he leave now? They were on the cusp of a revolution, right? I mean, the kingdom of Israel was about to be restored. And then he laid it out. He said this, "A new command I give you." A new command, they must have thought. We don't need any new commands. We already have 600 plus commands. And why was he talking about new commands? We need to make plans, right? Besides, what gave Jesus the right to add any new commandments? Only God had the authority to do that. But then again, only God had the authority to forgive sins. So they had seen Jesus step into this uncomfortable role on multiple occasions. So perhaps they were quiet. Anyway, as it turned out, Jesus wasn't even adding a new command to an existing list of commands. He was actually replacing the existing list with one single command. He continued and he said this, a new command I give you, and here it is, love one another. Now, that wasn't really all that new, but Jesus wasn't really all that through. He wasn't commanding them to feel something. He was commanding them to do something. And what came next, well, it was unthinkable. But what came next changed the world. And what came next has the potential to change your world. What Jesus said next is the basis for our fifth and final question. What came next trumped the golden rule. I like to call it the platinum rule. Here's what he said. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. As I have loved you, he defines it, so you must love one another. That was new. Apparently, doing for others what one hoped others would do for them in return was so last century. Jesus tells his followers they are to do unto others as he had done unto them. Now, this was extraordinarily personal for the men seated around the table that night. I mean, when us modern Christians read, as I have loved you, we immediately think of the cross, but they didn't. They thought back over the previous 3 years. Perhaps each man in the room was transported back to some particular moment in time where Jesus had loved him particularly well. I mean, he could have worked his way around the room, right? I mean, one by one, he could have said to each of those 12 men, love as I have loved you. Extend to everyone you meet the same grace and the same forgiveness I extended personally to you. And he could have added this, and gentlemen, if you think you've seen me love, tighten your sandals, you ain't seen nothing yet. Little did they know that on the following day, he would put on a demonstration of love that would take their breath away. Because the following day, he would give his life away. He continued, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, here's the thing, and this is so easy for us to miss. This new command brand of love was to serve as the unifying and defining characteristic for his new movement, the church. His new command was to serve as the governing ethic, the standard against which all of their behavior was to be measured. They were to love as he had loved. They were to love as he would love, which means this, that following Jesus would not be about looking for ways to get closer to a God who dwelled out there or up there somewhere. Jesus followers would demonstrate their devotion to God by putting the person next to them in front of them. Jesus followers wouldn't authenticate their love for God by looking up. They would authenticate their devotion to God by looking around, by loving the people around them. And in an unprecedented move for a religious figure, Jesus didn't leverage his equality with God or even his messianic authority to stir his followers to action. He leveraged his love. In other words, Jesus didn't anchor his new command to his divine right as king. He anchored it to his own personal sacrificial love. Why would his disciples obey this new command? Why would they obey his command to love? Because he first loved them. They were to do unto others as Jesus had already done and was about to do unto them. Hours later, again, Jesus would stage a demonstration of love that not only took their breath away, it took their excuses away as well, along with ours. Think about it. A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. Jesus' all-encompassing command was far less complicated than the current system, but it would turn out to be far more demanding as well. There would be no loopholes, no workarounds in this new brand of love. And that brings us at last to our final question, the relationship question. The question that honestly paves the path to relational health. The question that lays a foundation for mutually beneficial relationships. It's a question that brings inescapable clarity to just about every relational decision. Every relational decision you'll ever bump up against. Our final question actually takes us to the heart of Jesus' new covenant command. Question number 5 is this: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? This clarifying and, yes, at times terrifying question should stand guard over our consciences. It should serve as the guide, the signpost, a compass as we navigate the unavoidable complexities of relationship. It should inform how we date, how we parent, how we boss, how we manage, how we coach. It should form a perimeter around what we say and do in our roles as spouse, co-worker, and neighbor. This question, think about it, this question gives voice to God's will for us on issues where the Bible is silent. It succeeds where concordances and commentaries fail. If you're a Christian, it crushes that insipid justification we're so prone to make. Well, the Bible doesn't say there's anything wrong with fill in the blank. This question closes all those loopholes. It exposes our hypocrisy. It stands as judge and jury. It's so simple, but it is inescapably demanding. Our final question intersects with every imaginable relationship scenario you'll ever face. We're all tempted at times to ask or wonder how little we can get by with relationally, right? The very thing we don't want the person on the other side of us to consider. This question calls us all to account. When unsure of what to say or do, ask what love requires of you. When unsure of what to say or do, simply ask what love requires of you. You don't need chapter and verse. You have something better. Namely, Jesus' new, all-encompassing, inescapably simple command. We are to do unto others as our Heavenly Father through Christ has done unto us. Now, I imagine you're smart enough to know what love requires of you most of the time, but just in case, if love one another is not specific enough, the New Testament is actually full of real-world applications of what Jesus' new command brand of love looks like in the real world. In fact, the authors of the New Testament didn't add to Jesus' new command. They simply told us how to apply it. And the Apostle Paul provides us with the clearest applications. In his letter to Christians living in the Roman province of Galatia, we call it the book of Galatians, he actually insists that when it comes to relationships, here's what love requires. It requires kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. That's what love looks like in the real world. When in doubt, max those out. The interesting thing is that was Paul's short list. His most detailed description of what love looks like and acts like is actually found in his first letter to Christians who lived in Corinth. Now, this list is so familiar, I'm not sure it creates so much as a ripple in the consciences of most modern readers. And that is so unfortunate because this is the gold standard. According to Paul, what does love require of us? Paul says, here's what love requires of us. Love is patient. It's not pushy. Love requires that I move at your pace rather than demanding or requiring that you move at mine. He says love is kind. What is kindness? Kindness is love's response to weakness. Kindness is the choice to loan others our strength rather than reminding them of their weakness. It's doing for others what they cannot in that moment do for themselves. What does love require of us? He says, it does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. Love is humble. Love requires us to keep envy and pride from interfering with our ability to celebrate the success of other people. Love allows others to shine. What does love require of us? He says it does not dishonor others. Love requires us to show honor to others. Love never treats another person dishonorably. Love never treats another person disgracefully. Love never treats another person indecently. Love doesn't create regret. Think about it. Honor is at the heart of every satisfying relationship. Then he says this, it is not self-seeking. In other words, love is not selfish. Love puts the interest and the needs of the other person first. Think about it. That alone, that one idea alone would solve most relationship problems, wouldn't it? Then he says this: love is not easily angered. In other words, love is not easily stirred up or provoked. Love absorbs. Love puts the other person's story ahead of our own. He says love keeps no record of wrongs. Love isn't a scorekeeper. Love conveniently forgets the bad, and love conveniently elevates the good. Come on, forgiving and pretending to forget, you know this. Forgiving and pretending to forget, it is your best bet. To do otherwise is a power play. Think about it. When someone holds your past over you, who's in the elevated position? Love is not about powering up. Love is about stepping down, like Jesus did. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices in what's true. In other words, love doesn't enjoy catching the other person doing the wrong thing. Again, love celebrates when they get it right. And then he concludes with this big idea. He says, love always protects. In other words, love requires us to do everything in our power to protect or guard the relationship. Translated, love doesn't smuggle harmful things into a relationship, just the opposite. Love keeps harmful things out of the relationship. Love doesn't seek to win arguments. Love seeks to protect the relationship. Besides, come on, nobody ever wins an argument, especially when family's involved. I've seen too many parents win all the arguments and lose their kids in the process. Paul wraps up his list with this: love always trusts. Always trusts. Love chooses a generous explanation when the other person doesn't meet our expectations. Love requires us to believe the best while choosing to downplay the rest. Love always hopes, and love always perseveres. Now, that's quite a list, isn't it? But that's what love requires. And that's why our fifth question is not for the faint of heart. But consider this. Aren't the adjectives and verbs in Paul's list, aren't they the very thing you hope for or even expect from the people closest to you? Your spouse, your fiance, your parents, your kids. I mean, if these are the behaviors we consciously or even subconsciously expect from the folks around us, shouldn't they be required of us as well? So, what does love require of you? It may require you to pause this study, get up out of your chair, walk into the kitchen or the bedroom, and apologize. I'll wait. It may require you to pick up your phone and rebuild a bridge you burned down with your unassailable logic and your sarcasm. You were right, but being right wasn't what love required of you, was it? You may need to write a letter. You may need to rewrite an email. You may need to invite someone to coffee. And no, the other party may not be interested in what love requires of you. They may have no interest at all in what love requires of them either. But that's okay. Love requires that you just keep asking. So, with all of that as a backdrop, here's our fifth and our final decision, should you choose to decide it. Decision number 5, the relationship decision. I will decide with the interest of others in mind. I will decide with the interest of others in mind. Now, like you, my views on a variety of topics have evolved or really completely changed through the years. This includes my views on parenting, marriage, money, just to name a few. And one of the humbling things about being a pastor is that most of my views on just about everything, honestly, are documented somewhere on a hard drive. I mean, every preacher I know wishes they could go back and re-preach or unpreach or delete some old sermons. We meant well, but then life happened. Kids happened. Tragedy struck. We grew. We changed. But while our knowledge and beliefs are in flux, one thing is not. There's one thing that really transcends my limited knowledge and my limited insight and even my limited experience. And that one thing is love. Love fills the gaps. Love reduces the friction created by my limited insight and knowledge. I mean, there's so many things I don't know. There are things I'll never understand. But here's the thing. My ignorance and your ignorance, my ignorance does not impede my capacity to put other people first. So while I'm not always sure what to believe, I almost always know what love requires of me. And I bet you do too. So next time you find yourself driving home, having that imaginary conversation with your husband or your wife or your son or your daughter, next time you find yourself driving to work, having that imaginary conversation with your boss, that manager, that challenging employee, pause and ask yourself this question. What does love require of me? Because after all, good questions, they lead to better decisions, and your decisions determine the direction and the quality of your life. In our study, we've learned so much together, and I just want to pull it all together as we wrap up our time together. Your decisions serve as the framework. Remember this, your decisions serve as the framework for the story of your life. So I want you to write a good one. And while there's nothing you can do about the decisions you choose to go back and unmake or erase, remember this, your regrets are only part of your story. They don't have to be the story. Your past should remind you, but it does not have to define you. So incorporate our 5 questions into the rhythm of your life. Decide to tell yourself the truth, even when the truth makes you feel bad about yourself. Explore rather than ignore your conscience. Raise your standard of living from what's acceptable to what's wise, and do what love requires of you. Write a story you'll be proud to tell, a story distinguished by better decisions and fewer regrets. Again, thanks so much for inviting me into your group. I hope you'll invite me back sometime. Enjoy your discussion and happy decision making.
Well, I think that's just an incredible, sorry, unmute myself. There we go. I think that's an incredible presentation on love. That would just be a blinding sermon, just superb. I made a load of notes earlier today when I was preparing for this, and I just wondered if any of those things that he said jumped out at you at all. Any initial reactions? I've got lots of discussion questions, but any thoughts? What do you think?
Immediately, I did find the question scary. What does love require of me? And just the first thing that sort of popped into my head, while I was kind of just sort of having a bit of a doodle when I was watching it, and the first thing, and I kind of underlined, is that you have to be vulnerable, because I think in order to love, you do kind of have to expose parts of yourself, and again, it's kind of putting all the cares of the world aside, putting your ego aside, and it's being vulnerable to, if I'm going to choose what does love require of me dealing in this situation, that it might not, the person might not return that love to me. And I find that I do find that a challenge.
More than perhaps the other decisions, this particular one affects other people, but it may not have the desired outcome. So it's a bit more hazy and fuzzy, isn't it? When we choose to love somebody, that may not get returned. It may be turned down or rejected. We only have to look at Jesus to see how much that got rejected. And it's almost like a model for, you can put some love out there and you can open yourself, but it's not a guarantee of the kinds of things you're hoping for, or the effect that you want for everybody to have. But I guess at least you know that you've done the right thing in yourself. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other initial thoughts from what Andy presented?
I think it's easier with some people than others, and I think sometimes it can be quite uncomfortable. And that I think when we've talked about children, and I think when your child is growing up, it's easy to love them, and it's easy to sort of think, I got that wrong. But I think when it's between adults and that, for instance, if you've got to apologise, if you've got to step back, sometimes, as Debbie said, you are making yourself vulnerable, and sometimes it can be uncomfortable. You know what you need to do, but sometimes you have to think about it. And none of us likes to feel uncomfortable or vulnerable. So sometimes it's a hard decision to make, but you have to make it, sort of thing. So I just think sometimes it can be uncomfortable depending on who the person is.
I think you're right, Peggy. And one of the things that I've noticed, though, is if you're prepared to be uncomfortable in that way, it actually paves the way for others to respond to that. Very often, not always, but quite often, if somebody's willing to, we all sense perhaps, I don't know, perhaps if on the Zoom I had to apologise to Roy for something and, there was a really genuine apology, I'm hoping that the rest of you would kind of connect with that uncomfortableness that you've identified there, Peggy, and that you wouldn't then be too hard on either Roy or me. There would be a sense of, okay, there's some boundaries coming down here a bit. So it does lead the way or show an example when you do that. But you're totally right. It can be the most difficult thing in the world sometimes to take that preemptive step. It can feel very counterintuitive. Much easier to defend and be angry or retreat into your silo. Yeah, very much so. Any other reactions from what Andy said tonight?
I was thinking, Nick, as he was going through the list in 1 Corinthians, that there is just so much in there, isn't there, really?
Yeah.
The part about it doesn't dishonour. And I don't know, sometimes, when you talk to other couples, that it seems like they like to score points off each other, and by putting the other person down. And sometimes that's just kind of fun and it's what you do. But you have to be very careful that you don't cross a line, don't you, where it goes beyond the joke and somebody gets hurt. And just thinking about how to honour people in decision making.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. And in fact, just this week, we've been doing some marriage prep with a couple who are going to be getting married later this year. And one of the items on there is, is that very point. Are you building up your spouse when they're there? Are you building up your wife or your husband when they're not there? Don't be getting into chatting with all the ladies at the school gate and going, oh, he never does this, he never does that. Be the opposite of that. That's the example of being countercultural in our society, where we're giving honour in a way that perhaps people around us in the world are not doing that so much, or perhaps it's fashionable or trendy to just not be so kind. So I think giving honour is a great way to express love. Yeah.
So right, Pastor Nick. Actually, it's quite subversive what Jesus' command here, because you only have to look at Twitter and be on it for maybe 10 minutes and you will just see literally people being rewarded with follows and likes for being dishonorable, being rude, talking trash to each other. It's kind of, I think, very much kind of, the mainstream culture is to kind of to not be loving. It is, so that just really clicked with me when you said that. It's countercultural. It's something that seems so simple on the face of it, but actually it's a massive challenge to go in the opposite direction, and actually go, and actually it is the most challenging choice, but it's the only choice. It's the only thing that actually is going to sort of change things and make this world better. That's so yeah, I really agree.
Well, it can be the most challenging thing, and yet it can be the most rewarding.
Oh yes, yeah.
If you're loving your husband or you're loving your wife, you are investing yourself in somebody else, and you are wanting them to be happy. I was asked once, what makes a good marriage? And I said, well, my wife's happiness is my responsibility, and my happiness is my wife's responsibility. We look after each other. You see for each other. You can see when there's a need. I may not say something, but there may be a need. And talking about when the children were small, I remember we used to come home from work, and the first thing I do is throw the hat in to find out what the mood was, whether the kids had been awkward or difficult or it's had a good day, But whatever the mood was, you had to meet it and help and love the children, but your wife as well, to make sure that she's happy and trust you.
Go on, Abby. Thanks, Roy.
Whilst everyone is talking, and one thing that really jumped to me is that is it possible as an individual to actually, because looking at that commandment that says love one another as Christ has loved us as well, I just wonder, can you ever do that? Is not at any point in time where you sometimes fall short of that, and for me, I feel, and no wonder when Jesus Christ was living, he said that's really the greatest commandment. And that for me makes me wonder, is this really something someone can do that you are 100% correct about loving one another? Or are those times when you just say, oh, during this period I love, during some of this period I don't love? I don't know.
It's a great issue that you raised, and I don't know if you spotted this, and I was quite sort of surprised and challenged by this, but I actually think that one of the things that he brings out in his teaching is that, you know, we have this thing about the greatest commandment is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, what I think he seemed to be teaching, and I think he's right to say this, is that he brings out this idea that he uplifts the greatest commandment. So now, before you think I'm getting into heresy, just roll with me on this a little bit, okay? I actually think that it goes from love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, that there's a balance, like if there's a seesaw of love, that you're loving your neighbor as much as you would love yourself. So that's kind of a parity there, that they're equal. But what he does in John chapter 13 is he says, it morphs slightly and it becomes love your neighbor as Jesus loves you. Now there's a slight difference there. So instead of my standard of loving Peggy being the standard by which I want Peggy to love me, and my standard being flawed and not being, you know, that great, and which taps into what you've said there, Abby, it's actually Jesus's standard of how Jesus loves me that I should then show Peggy. And that is a stretch. That is up there. That takes you to the next level. And I've never really spotted that from the New Testament before, you know, until I watched Andy Stanley's teaching that. And I was thinking, yeah, that's a great point. So in other words, the greatest commandment is, yes, definitely love God as, you know, love God with all your heart, soul, strength and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Yes, nothing wrong with that. But in John 13, at the Last Supper, I think that Jesus uplifts that to, no, I want you to love other people as I have loved you. To an exceptional level, you know, to the gold standard level. And I was really interested by that. Now, I don't know whether you would agree with me on that, but I think that could be seen as an uplift. You know, you're not putting your love through the lens of your own standard. You're saying, okay, help me with this, Jesus, and I want to do it the way you've shown the love to me. You know, for instance, we might be a person who's not great on forgiveness, and so we don't expect that from other people. And so when we love other people as ourselves, the forgiveness is a little bit low. But when we turn that into, well, how would Jesus do that? Well, he's forgiven us a whole lot, and so we need to forgive other people a whole lot. So so I'm going to ask a couple of the questions that he's put in his study guide, and a few that I've thought of myself. Why do you think that the relationship question is both the most uncertain and also the most demanding of all the questions? So if you just think back through the questions, just so they give you a quick frame of reference again, we had the integrity question. You know, am I in integrity in doing this? The legacy question, what is the story I want to build? We looked at Joseph and how he didn't want to build a story which had adultery with Potiphar's wife in it, and he skirted around that and got himself out of that really difficult situation. We looked at the conscience question. You know, is there something that's niggling that I need to pay attention to? And then Mark looked last week at the maturity question. Where is this taking us in our personal growth? And so on. But the relationship question, Andy, by his own admission, says this is much more difficult. You know, it's more uncertain, it's more demanding. Why do you think that's the case? Any thoughts?
I think probably because it involves other people. Because look at every other question is about yourself, basically, and you can know how to deal with yourself. But when you start looking to incorporate other people in terms of love, that becomes really difficult anyway, because it's no longer about yourself, and it's about the other people, and you don't know, as you said, how well the other people are going to take the love you're going to be giving to them, and how well they'll probably respond to the love you're giving to them as well. So yeah, so it can be very tricky and difficult. Yeah,
great point, and I think that's absolutely spot on. I think other people can be, or can feel a bit random, can't they? You've got no idea the reaction that they're going to have to the love you show. Could be awful, you know. You hope that it's great, but sometimes it's really not. Yeah, so yeah, that's very complicated, isn't it? You can do a very loving, preemptive thing to somebody, and it really backfires, and you feel, you know, oh gosh, that was really painful, you know. Yeah. Any other ideas? Why is this difficult?
Well, the other questions They're really about how we control ourselves and how we present ourselves to other people and how comfortable we are with ourselves. But in this one, you're really making yourself very vulnerable, and you have no control of what's going to come back at all.
Yeah.
And so you are making yourself very vulnerable, but then again, it can be extremely rewarding. So the risk is worth taking.
Mm-hmm.
I think as well, Nick, when we're thinking about other people, it very often requires us to put ourselves out, doesn't it? It requires that we do something, and we might not, want to do it or feel like we've got the time to do it, but you have got to do that, and it's going to cost you some time and effort, isn't it, as well? That's why I think it's more difficult.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does require time and effort. It requires, there's a cost associated with it. And I think the lazy person inside of me doesn't always want to, get up and pay that cost. That's a simple answer to that. Yeah, it definitely puts you out. I can think of times when, I kind of have this rule with my boys that if they ever come and suggest playing something in the park, I'll try and do it that day, if not at that point, because I don't want to be the sort of dad that always says, oh yeah, tomorrow, but sometimes I have been tired, and then I'll drag myself over there, but then we get going and it's fine. But so yeah, there's a cost, isn't there? Yeah, definitely. Just a quick shout out to people on the feed. We've got 35 people on YouTube. Really appreciate that. Louise Darwood's made the good point, which we've kind of touched on already, which is that other people can reject your love. And Claudia says rightly, relationship simply adds another dimension to the decision. It's not just us and God, and that's a great spot. We've got 10 people on Facebook. Inez Scarlett makes a great point that we've got the Holy Spirit that can help us. Sam saying, how are we reaching the world? Jesus said, go out and make disciples. And are we doing that as BCC? Are we really connecting with the people around us in our world? It's a great point, Sam. How are we reaching people outside the church doors? Clearly at the minute during lockdown, we're not meeting together at all on the campus, or gathering together, and so hence we're sort of live streaming out. But you can, there's things you can do. You can share this on your social media, and you can connect in with people through WhatsApp and invite them to stuff. In fact, we had a lady join us tonight on our WhatsApp. I think she's on watching. I encouraged her to join for the first time. So thank you, Sam. Those are good comments, and I'm really appreciating the input on the live streams. That's great. One of the things that I spotted that's really hard with this particular question number 5 about love, is there aren't any loopholes and there isn't the chance of an escape into legalism. Now, what I mean by that is that with love, he said, didn't he? He said, love fills all the gaps and plugs my ignorance. But sometimes when we're filling the gaps, we've got to be comprehensive. And it fills in the bits that we don't know, or it fills in where we don't know the right answer, but we're just showing love. That can make it feel awkward. And also, I guess some of us as Christians, and some of us in the world who perhaps aren't following Christ, would love a set of rules to follow, wouldn't we? We'd love a kind of prescription to go through. But love doesn't work like that. Love isn't a tick list. If I've done these 5 things, then, my friend is going to be happy. It's not quite that simple, and I think that's also what makes it really, really awkward. Anything else that strikes you about the awkwardness of the love question?
Do you think that there's different degrees of love? Because within a married couple, that's a different kind of love. Well, you wouldn't want the husband to be showing that kind of love that he shows to his wife, to every other woman. So I think there has to be some kind of boundaries. Is that the right word? I don't know. Because, people have to, when you say love, to me, I would say show kindness, because that's not so... what's the word? I don't know. Not invasive, because sometimes with love, people can overstep boundaries, can't they?
Yes, they can. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we, when you say to people, especially young, mature, immature Christians or new Christians, that's the word I should use, you know, you say, oh, well, yes, you must love everybody, you must do this, you must do that. But there has to be some boundaries. But I think when you're a mature person, you know what them boundaries are. Do you know?
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely, Peggy. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you're really wise to say that, and it's a really good point to bring up. And I actually think God himself is very comfortable with his boundaries, if you think about it. You know, God communicates his boundaries clearly. He says what he thinks is great, and he says what he thinks is not great. And he makes that quite plain in the Ten Commandments. You know, we have a list of things that he says that we must, you know, we should be doing, and a list of things that are really not very displeasing to him. And he makes that really clear. And I actually think that's a good model for us in the way that we should teach other people how to treat us. You know, in fact, actually, I think that's a form of love. You know, if you rub up against somebody who's got, I don't know, sort of relational viruses, is a difficult person because of things that they're doing to people around them that are not good, I actually think it's a responsible and a loving thing to show them a better way to do things. Yeah, and Paul says that, doesn't it? I can show you a better way. I actually think that's a responsibility that we have as church and as people, that sometimes when someone treats us poorly, it's not that we kind of just reject them and necessarily give them distance, although in some extreme cases I think that may be warranted. It depends. But in most cases it's right to teach people how to treat you better according to your boundaries. I totally agree with that.
That's a very interesting comment, Peggy, that you made in terms of boundaries, and it just kind of, I think for our own good as well, as individuals, it's always very good for us to find ways to draw boundaries. And it just kind of reminds me of Jesus' story as well, where we've seen cases where Jesus Christ had to show mercy to the woman, to the prostitute woman that wanted to be stoned to death, and just said, no, like, who among you have not done this? First cast the stone. He had basically just go and sin no more. And it's the same Jesus Christ as well that you saw when in Jerusalem he had to chase people away out of the temple, basically, to say, I'm not going to allow buying and selling in my Father's house, basically. And that's just right saying that in as much as I could love the worst of the worst sinners as well, I'm not going to allow you to, in a way, take my Father's house for granted. And Jesus was able to kind of, to some extent, draw that boundary, basically. And I think that is very, very important for us as individuals, for us to be able to say, to what extent can we go? Because if we keep saying that, especially when you keep giving love to someone that is not going to receive it, it's going to cause a big problem. Of course, then you can keep doing that and keep doing that and keep doing that, but you have to get to a time where, especially when you don't want someone to start dragging you in the mud or start pulling you down, or actually make you regret the love you're actually showing to that person as well. So I think that boundary is very, very important, especially in our day-to-day, especially when you know that you've given love to someone and they're not really, really receiving it. They might have to say, let me withdraw a bit.
No, I think you're right. I think it's really important that we have a good and godly sense of self-esteem, and if that gets attacked, that we have a right to speak up and to say, no, that's not right. You know, I'm always conscious of Jesus, his trial, and how he conducted himself. And there were certain points where, for instance, he was just silent. He didn't get into a slanging match. You know, he didn't even answer Herod, I don't think. You know, he got sent by Pilate over to see Herod, didn't he? And Herod asked him loads of questions and said, well, perform some miracles for me and stuff like that. And he just didn't say a word. Mm-hmm. And silence is very powerful sometimes when someone's attacking you. You know, it sets a boundary, doesn't it? It says, hey, you know, most people are wanting to do a bit of this and that with words and spar, but you know, Jesus models, well, that's not necessarily always what I'm going to do. So I think in all these things, we're always looking to the model and the example of Jesus as to how to behave, and to help us steer through how we make great decisions based on other people's best interests at heart. And sometimes we have to make decisions that initially to the person listening aren't their best interests at heart. In fact, I tweeted today something related to this. It was an unrelated thought, but it kind of weaves in, which was the idea that we would not really go to a GP practice if all they did was comfort us and give us a hot chocolate and give us a hug, you know, and kind of say, oh, they're there, or not tell us what we need to be told. You know, I need my GP to say, Nick, you need to lose a couple of stone, otherwise you're going to have some health problems, and it's going to hurt, and then I need to respond to that and change some practices. And I think it's the same way with the church. The church need to be able to say, well, no, you need Jesus, you need to follow his teaching. Yes, it doesn't suit what you are, where you're at right now, but actually it is the right thing. And so on the surface that doesn't feel very loving, but actually underneath it's hugely loving. Just as the doctor's being hugely loving to me to get me back on track with my health. Just to give you an example of how that would work. It's not always easy. This love question is very nuanced sometimes, and it depends on context and the relationships you've got, the history, lots and lots of things.
I was just thinking as well, Nick, and just following on from what Peggy and Abby was saying, and I think, again, us reading the Bible in English, and the word love is just love. But now, do correct me if I'm wrong. Now, there's different translations for the word love, isn't there, from Greek? Like, there's the love that Jesus has for us, which is agape, and then there's like the love that you have for your fiance, which is like eros, and I found it, when I first discovered this, I found it really helpful to know that God has a special kind of love. It's not just, because now sometimes love sadly can be like a throwaway word, and people can just sort of say I love you and not actually mean anything. But I found it really moved me in my spirit to know that agape, that self-sacrificial love, it's like Jesus is just all in. And I just found it really helpful to know that that's the kind of love. I mean, I think that's probably why I found it so scary, the question, what does love require of me? Because I know it's that type of self-sacrificial love. It's you're all in. It's not half measures, but it's beautiful and life-changing as well.
Yeah, there's different sorts of love, isn't it? It's like,
yeah. I don't remember them all because not being the professional theologian.
But in the modern context, for example, respecting another person is a form of love.
Yeah.
Because you're honouring them, aren't they? And for example, with the birthday wishes that Nick had last weekend, that is a form of love as well, a different expression of love because it's a different relationship. So we express love in different ways with different people depending upon what they mean to us or what we mean to them, as the case may be.
Yeah, that's true. And just to add to that, in terms of what Peggy said, and as well as what Debbie said and Roy, with regard to the types of love, I think we have about 3 or 4 types of love. The eros, which is more like the erotic and passionate love you have for someone else.
What was it? What were they? What was it? There was eros.
We have the eros. We have philia. The philia is the love you have for friends.
Right.
And then we have the agape, which is the love to mankind. And then there's another one. It's called storge, which is the love for parents or for children, basically. So that's what I can remember in terms of the 4 types of love.
I'll have to look that up after, but yeah, thanks, Abby. Yeah,
I think you're right there, Abby. I remember there are broadly 3 kinds of love. I think agape, eros, and philos, or as you say, and they represent different kinds of love in different settings. But the agape one is that kind of very deep-seated love which looks to the long-term interests of another in a very selfless way, I think. Eros is perhaps between husband and wife, that romantic and sexual love, and philos is the relationship between friends, that friendship love that we have between us. But it's the agape word is the one that Jesus uses in John, I think it's John 20 or I think it's John 21 actually, where he restores Peter at the beach. He's cooking the fish on the coals of fire, and he says to John 3 times, he says, "Do you love me?" And I think the final time he says it, he uses the agape word, which is the highest form of that selfless love. One of the things. Go on. Sorry.
and I think also because Scripture said that in Romans 5 that God have poured the love of God in our heart, and that is really what the emphasis is more, that a selfless love or a sacrificial love is only really possible when we really have God's strength. When we first love God, then God give us the ability, because realities we're limited in our fleshly nature to love a person which is unlovely. And I think it's more when we love God, then our love to others will increase, because God give us the ability that the Spirit control our life.
Definitely, Bernd. I think you touched on something really important there, which is that this standard of love that Jesus shows towards us, that I think Abby near the beginning said, wow, that's really hard to, sometimes think about how we could match that. Actually, what happens is Jesus through us helps us to lift to that level at times, and through the influence of the Spirit and the inspiration from Scripture and the example of Jesus. But we do get a different kind of strength when we start to follow Jesus. He changes our perspective on other people. I've heard many testimonies where people have sort of said, I was all out for myself, it was all about me, it was all about my TikTok ratings, or it was all about my my world, whatever it might be. Focus on me, and actually there's a switch around went on as they became a true follower of Jesus and really understood how much he loved them, and their world changed, because it was like, wow, they started to have compassion on the people around them and started to notice people in different ways, in new situations. So I think that's very true, that God pours out his love into us.
Yeah, because in 1 John he said that he who loves God must love his brothers. Although really he must love his brother, because when we say we love God, we can't love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I noticed, I noted down, you're absolutely right. I noted down a great statement that Andy Stanley made. He said, Jesus followers would demonstrate their devotion to God by putting the person next to them in front of them. And then he followed it up by saying Jesus followers would not authenticate their devotion to God by looking up. They would authenticate it by looking around. That's a very powerful statement. So basically what Jesus is teaching in John 13 is you will show the world the love that is possible with me, in a relationship with me, by the way in which you love the people around you. And so there's this really strong imperative that we are to really love people, the people that we've got around us, and to show that. Great statement. I love that. And the disciples would be inspired to love one another like Jesus loved them, because he had loved them first. And so they'd had that love given to them, as in the Romans 5 love that comes into us from God when we admit that we're a sinner, we need Jesus, and then it starts to pour out from us towards other people. Yeah, absolutely. I'm quite interested to notice that where Andy went with this was he went in three main places. He went with John 13, which is the beginning of the discourses over the Last Supper, what Jesus brings at the Last Supper to the disciples just before he goes to his death. He also goes to 1 Corinthians 13, as we saw towards the end of his talk, and talks about all the different parts of love. And we'll come on to that in just a minute. But he also touches on the aspects of love in Galatians 5:22, from the gifts of the Spirit. And he picks out 5 of them in particular that are to do with how we love other people. And that the 5 of them are kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, as fruit of the Spirit, which is kind of echoing what Bernd's point, which is that we need God on the inside of us to help us achieve this. So, of those 5, which is the one that comes easiest to you, and which is the one that you find the hardest? So I'll just put that out there. So you've got love, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. Anyone want to be brave and tell us one that they struggle with? I'm someone that can be gentle in certain situations, and I'm not gentle in others, and I need to spread the gentleness around a bit more. So, for instance, if I'm working on a DIY project and it's not going very well, I sometimes have to go and speak to Chloe and get some gentleness help. And she'll sort of say, you need to not try and force this so much. And she'll take it off me and she'll kind of gently sort it out and then give it back to me. You know, that can sometimes happen. So I'm working on gentleness on the DIY front. Anyone else?
I think the self-control is a challenge for me. I think my default setting is that I am quite impulsive and I kind of go in like the proverbial bull in a china shop. So yeah, God's helping me with the self-control thing. Yeah, and I've definitely got better at it over the years, but it's still something I have to keep on top of.
Yep. I think we can all identify with that, Debs.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Oh, really?
Any other thoughts on some of the fruit of the Spirit?
I wonder what is meant by goodness, Nick. Because I sometimes think when we think of being good, we talk about the things that I'm not explaining about of not being what. I'll come back to me in a minute when I've thought it through.
No, I kind of think I know where you're going with this. It's quite hard to perhaps put specific definition around goodness, because a lot of the other words cover much more specific areas of what that might mean. So goodness feels a bit kind of broad, doesn't it, sometimes? I
used to think, my mum would always say when we went out anywhere, be good, and what she meant was don't be naughty. And I think we often see goodness in terms of the negative things that we shouldn't do. But there must be a lot of positive to being good, mustn't there, as well? The things that we should do and can do, rather than just the things that we oughtn't to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always reminded when everybody talks about the do's and the don'ts, I'm always reminded of that initial pattern in the Garden of Eden, in which they had an entire garden to look after and all the different trees that they were there to tend and all the different, aspects of the garden. And they only had one prohibition. And I feel like that's a model for a lot of Christians to maybe get their heads around a bit more, that there's a loads more stuff to go and do positively than there are restrictions. Now clearly there are some very key restrictions, of course, but there's so much that we can be doing that as Christians we don't almost give ourselves permission to go and do. So I think goodness is a very huge area, and somebody needs to write a book on goodness.
I think maybe it's the extra mile, that you go the extra mile for some other person.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, so Jesus teaches a little bit into goodness, I think, in the Sermon on the Mount. And if somebody wants to borrow your coat, and you can lend it to him for 1 mile, and he let him have it for 2, and it's doing the extra, I think, is a key point. That's a great point, Bernd. Yeah, very good. But goodness is definitely part of love. And you feel goodness off people, don't you? In their character and how they are over time. Yeah.
Perhaps it's also helping people who you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You see a stranger suddenly in need, and you just help them at that point in time, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody may have dropped their shopping or something like that, or got a bit confused, or whatever the need is, and you've got no relationship with them. You don't know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
You just help.
We got a good bit of input from Maxine Thomas on the Facebook. She says that the Bible tells us that the word good actually means holy and pure and righteous. And literally, goodness is kind of like a form of godliness. It's linked to that same root word. So goodness can often be seen in our actions, but it's also to do with the purity of our heart. And the goodness of Christ is to be demonstrated in our lives every day. That's a great response, Maxine. Thank you for that. I think you've really helped us with the discussion there. I think we were floundering over the enormity of goodness, and you've given us some definition, which is really helpful. So thank you for that. And just a shout out again to some of our people on our live streams. We've got folk on Facebook watching, and also we've got 40 odd people on YouTube watching in as well. Just some different people are commenting and listening in on the stream. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I've got some 1 or 2 other questions just to unpack a little bit. I really liked how Andy Stanley unpacked some of those points from 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, and I love the way he said that meant moving at your pace, not mine. I really like that. It's very tempting sometimes. I don't know if you've ever been in this scenario prior to the pandemic, and there's a couple walking down the aisle in the supermarket, and basically they're just in the way. I'm not going to be rude, but they are, and you have to try and bustle or wait and stuff. And sometimes it's just great to just wait and be patient and let them be. You've got no idea what they're navigating. Maybe they've just come back from hospital with some really horrible diagnosis. There's a phrase, isn't there? We can't tell what half of what people are battling in their heads, and so be kind, isn't it? So yeah, patience is a great way to show our love, isn't it? Any of the other statements? Go on, Royce. Sorry, say again.
Especially when you're driving.
I was just about to say that too.
Yeah.
Run the bus and let somebody else do the driving.
Yeah. I can't really speak into that area very well, or without being a bit hypocritical. One of my pet hates is being undertaken on the motorway, so I have to just actively back off and let that happen. Were there any other statements connected to 1 Corinthians 13 that really struck you from what Andy Stanley taught? Anything that you kind of found, oh yeah, that really rang a bell? One further one, go on, Peggy, I'll come to you in just a second. One further one for me was the kindness of love, which is love is loaning other people our strength rather than reminding them of their weakness. That was a great definition of kindness. I think that's really good. Go on, Peggy.
No, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just going to say about being boastful, as I think Kathy said something about not scoring points and, from each other, especially with husband and wife. And I think sometimes you can be boastful, can't you, in love, and sort of lord it over somebody, especially if somebody's a weaker character and you're a strong character, and never ever giving them chance to express their opinions, and that I think that can be boastful, and that's not showing love, because their opinion matters, doesn't it, at the end of the day? And it's about giving people their worth, showing them their worth. I think that's how I would sort of determine not being boastful, but always letting them have their opinion and valuing what they have got to say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think that applies especially when you're talking about children, listening to what the children may say. It may not be quite correct, but just giving them value for their opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. The capacity to really hear somebody is a form of kindness and showing honour and giving them space to say what they need to say. And I think sometimes we're all so busy, aren't we? We can fail to do that. I have a few things on my phone as a wallpaper thing, just to remind me what I feel I'm called to be in Jesus. And one of them is be present to people and to now. Because I can often race off in my head into other things when I'm in front of the person that needs my attention. So really listening to somebody is a form of loving them, I think. Very much so, yeah. I really liked what he said about when love always protects. Love keeps harmful things out of a relationship. I love that. I thought, what a great way of seeing that, and so many relationships fail on that score, either in a minor way or in a really horrible way. And you think, wow, that's a great standard. If you ever wonder how to protect somebody in your love for them, the first task of that is to keep harmful things out of the relationship. Now, that's not necessarily to keep stressful things out of the relationship or challenges out of the relationship or things that will make people grow and be good for their long-term health, but harmful things, yes, they need to be kept out. So, and we kind of all do that as parents. I think we understand what could be harmful to our kids, and we work hard to ensure that won't happen. So,
I also think the other thing is about the protection, in terms of like love protects as well, and I think that's something like it's sometimes very easy as individuals to often forget, especially when it's just, oh, it's none of my business. And I think it's sometimes always our business sometimes to try as much as possible to protect other people, especially when, for example, maybe when you see other category of people are kind of ganging against them, or like, oh, I don't want to get into this matter, it's none of my business. And I think it's very bad. And even not just that alone, even protecting the church too, protecting people, especially with regards to what people say regarding the church. And I think it's an act of love actually standing for the church to say, this is what you believe and this is what the church is about. Especially in this day and age where anyone could just keep saying any random things about the church and any negative information about the church, basically just because they don't believe in God and everything. And I think it's our responsibility as Christians to learn to start protecting the church as well. And that's our one way of showing love as well.
I think that's a great point, and I think we've got to do some of this, what I would say, some of this messier, harder work of this love decision does relate to protecting unity in the church, and that can be really hard at times. Sometimes church isn't always our personal thing, is it? I mean, BCC is the most fabulous church. Don't get me wrong. I'm delighted to be a pastor at BCC. It's one of the best places on earth. I just love it. But even having said that, not every single song is my absolute top number one. Or not every conversation I've had in the cafe has made me feel gorgeous. I'm just being honest. But we have to work hard together at putting some of our own preferences down and making an environment that works for all of us together, because there's strength in that togetherness. So that ability to love, to build unity, such a great point, Abby. I think there's a great statement in Ephesians, isn't there? Do not let any talk come out of your mouths except that which is wholesome and good for the building up of other people. Brilliant for unity in a church to watch that and make sure that you're building people with your words. Very good. Any other thoughts? I've got one or two more questions to go. Quite deep material tonight, isn't it?
It is.
He's taught I think one of his best sessions, and I almost want to kind of watch it again and go through the statements again. But anything else that's sort of rumbling around in your mind about the love question? Okay. What do you make of, here's a question for you, what do you make of the fact that love is something that surpasses knowledge or ignorance? So in other words, he made the point that, sometimes as we get older, we get wiser. And I think, Peggy, you touched on that, which we get better at knowing what our boundaries are and who we are as people and what's right as we mature. He said something, my ignorance should not impede my capacity to put other people first. In other words, we shouldn't make knowledge like a factor or a big factor in our ability to love. We should love at every age of our life. What do you make of that?
This is about not, especially sometimes we need to learn to love individuals, not necessarily about the kind of information we hear about them. Sometimes it's often very easy for us to judge and say, someone said this about this person and just hold that against them, basically, without actually experiencing that yourself to actually see whether this is true or not about them. And I think that's very important for us, even as Christians, to say, I'm not going to love based on what I hear about this person.
That's great. Yeah, I like that a lot.
What I hear about this person, but just to say, I will love the person. I will have my own personal relationship with the person.
Yeah, that's great. I really like that, and that's something I've always had as a bit of a rule of thumb, which is I will try to take somebody on their own merit when they're with me, and I'll kind of try and draw my own conclusions. Now I balance that with a bit of wisdom, whereas if I've got a lot of long-standing friends who say, "Oh, watch that one," I will definitely take that into account. But I also always want to give myself the freedom not to prejudge a person, particularly if I've never met them. And that's very easy in this day and age of social media, isn't it? I remember meeting somebody at a youth festival that I'd gained an impression of through their social media, which was very competent, and that was part of my problem, was their social media was very good, and I was a little bit envious, if I'm honest, at how they did things. And when I met the person, I was really rebuked in the Lord by how nice they were. They had this aura of being a bit unapproachable and a bit like up there, But when we chatted, we were chatting about prayer, you know, just in one of these breakout sessions. The kids were in having their session, and there were 3 or 4 of us chatting. He was a great bloke. And I felt really humbled in God about, you just need to stop making those judgments. You can't tell what someone's like from a distance sometimes. And the aura that can come across can be completely not how they really are. You know, we have to be very careful with that, don't we?
It's a very dangerous thing, isn't it, to be influenced by other people and say, oh, he's like this or she's like that. They may have an ulterior motive in trying to influence you. I mean, we do that with people in the public eye, the politicians and all this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to, like in the media, we tend to rely more on the opinions of the media to form our own opinions. We should actually form our own opinions anyway. And often you find, just like you said, Nick, that people that have been on the television or what have you, and they have a particular type of press, when you actually see them and be with them in a room and watch them, they're completely different. They're not what people say they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really have to be very careful about those sort of things. There's a lot of horrible things on social media, isn't there?
Yes, there are. What you say there, Roy, reminds me of something that Andy said, which was love chooses a generous explanation, perhaps when the other person doesn't initially meet expectations. You know, we have a phrase in our family of, hey, let's think the best of people. You know how sometimes something comes out from someone and it's kind of ambiguous, and you're thinking, oh, wait, where are you coming from with that? You know, I think we try. Love says, no, assume the best of somebody. Assume they've just had a terrible headache. Assume that the words they used, they just didn't know the full impact of those words. Assume that, you know, there wasn't an unkindness meant in the text they sent you. You know, let's start with that assumption, because that's the loving thing to do. And I guess the balancing act, or the tricky thing, is when that is definitely not a loving thing from them, and how you defend yourself in an appropriate way. That can be hard. I get that, but let's start with the assumption of that they're not meaning you harm. And you know, I think, Kathy, you have this great thing about, I just kind of assume that people will like me. You know, I think that's great. You know, and I think that's a really healthy thing. That's a healthy starting point, because the opposite is not a great thing, which is, well, I just assume nobody likes me. I mean, that's not going to work, is it? And it's not godly, and not what Jesus would think of you either. So it's not.
It's the same as you say, sending a text or an email or a letter, and you may want to express a particular thing, and the person receiving it may actually take a different idea from it, you know, an adverse reason, because of what's in their heart. And so when it's easier to be talking to them than it is to be texting and emailing people.
Yeah.
That's great, Roy. And I think we touched on this in one of the sessions before, didn't we? That the greater the weight of the conversation, potentially, the more in person you need to make it, I think. You know, and I think email's probably bottom of the list, isn't it? And texting's down there too. A phone call's a bit better, but if there's going to be some weight in that conversation with someone that you really care about, the much as you can, make it in person. And I know that's really hard right now with the pandemic, and that's been one of the unseen side effects of this difficult time, which that we don't get that opportunity to have those in-person conversations where we read each other's body language and we do feel that their heart is with us, you know. And that's why this has been, I think, such an insidious and difficult time. Going to finish. Go on, Roy. Go on.
I've sent text, meaning so and so, and I've sent it. Then after I've sent it, I'm looking to get, oh, they could read it a different way.
Yeah.
You know, so you have to send an apology type thing afterwards.
I'm gonna. We're kind of nearly coming to the end. It's come up to 5 to 9. I've got one more question to throw your way. I'll have a quick look on the feed as well at just some of the comments as well. Paul ends his list in 1 Corinthians 13 with love never fails. Okay. Now, how do we balance that statement in our broken world with its broken relationships, broken promises, where our humanity gets in the way of that? What would you say about that? How can we be people who can show that quality of God, of love never fails? Any counsel or advice that you'd want to throw into the pot?
I think.
Oh,
Sorry,
go on.
Peggy.
Go on, Peggy. You go first.
I was just going to say, I think as long as you are doing what God requires of you and that, then you cannot be responsible for how other people receive what you are trying to deliver to them. Yes, it does affect other people, but we have to be accountable for ourselves and accountable to God, and our behaviour has to be accountable to Him. So as long as we are doing what is required of us in the right way, then that's all we can ask and do. How others receive it, then they have to be accountable for themselves and to God. I mean, you can't do any more than that, really.
So the starting place for you, Peggy, would be that we have got that responsibility to follow what God is asking us to do, and that's the real great starting point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyone else in terms of that love never fails idea in a broken world? How can we make that work?
I think Peggy just hit the nail on the head perfectly. And I think again we just have to love. So even if our love isn't received in the way that we would have liked or the way that we planned, there's always somewhere for it to go. There's always someone who is crying out. There's always a situation that's crying out for God's love. So even if it's not, even if we're thinking, right, we're going to, love this person or put love into this situation, even if it doesn't quite work out how we thought it was going to work out, there's always somewhere for it to go. It's never wasted. And I think in that respect, it never fails because it's always going to be received. And I think God's love is always going to prevail.
Yes, I would just
even if it's in a way that we don't expect.
Yeah, I would just say love regardless. Regardless of what's happening, regardless of how it's received, where they don't reflect it back, you still carry on loving.
Yeah, that's true. Just to add, love, never stop loving.
Very good.
You can't make somebody receive something that you are giving. That's a choice that they have to make, And if you're giving it with all good intention, then you can walk away and say, well, God, I did it in your name. However the other person receives it, then you can't be accountable for that, can you?
I think that's a very good description of what Jesus's ministry was, Peggy. Which was that Jesus came and he offered what he had come from God to offer, and he did it in completely good faith and with pure heart. And whether people respond to that or not, he still gives them the freedom to decide whether they want to respond to that or not. I think that's a great point. We're going to bring it to a close. We've had lots of comments on our different live streams. I really appreciate all the different things that people have been saying. Thank you for your participation on there tonight. Now, just before I'm going to close in prayer in just a minute, and we'll close out our live streams and stuff. Just to let you know that this is the end of the current series. This series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. Andy's written a book that goes with this. You can get that from Amazon or your local bookstore. It's a really good read. I really recommend that if you want to just follow up on this a bit more and perhaps dwell on some of his teaching in it. It's very good. Now, next week, we won't be having Lifegroup as such. What's going to be happening is we're going to be live streaming out from BCC, not using the BCC's YouTube channel, but using the Birmingham City Leaders Prayer YouTube channel and the Birmingham City Leaders Prayer Facebook page. So we'll still be streaming from our building. But basically what's happening is that Pastor Mark and a group of leaders across the city have been working ever since the George Floyd incident earlier last year to come up with a charter that addresses the issues of racism. And so he's going to be, they're launching that next Wednesday. And I'd really, really encourage us all to participate in that and watch with that and pray about that. It's such an important issue. It's been so wounding for so many people, and we really want to try and bring a healthy response to that. And I think there's about 60 churches got involved across Birmingham. I know Pastor Mark's been on a Zoom call from 7 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, I think every other Wednesday since May last year. The guy has just done so much work on this and helped so well behind the scenes to build to this point. So we really want to support him in that. I think there's going to be a number of videos played at some speakers potentially speaking from the building as well. So just really want to give that a plug, and I really encourage you to connect in that and share that on your social media. But that's Time for Change, and it's a launch of their program and their charter and their website through that live stream from Birmingham City Leaders Prayer. Have I kind of got that right, Kathy? Is that roughly right from what you know? Yeah. Okay, so that's next Wednesday. And then the Wednesday after that, and the 3 Wednesdays leading up to Easter, we'll be doing a kind of 3-part study taking us into Easter, and you'll be able to find out a bit more about that nearer the time. So I'm just going to close in prayer, and then we'll say goodbye to our live stream friends, and we'll wrap up for the night. So Heavenly Father, I thank you for this very challenging teaching about loving people and being loving to one another. Lord, my takeaway tonight is to try to love as you have loved me through Jesus, not by my own standards of what I think love should be, but by the standards that Jesus has shown me. And I pray that we would all try to really embrace that and take that on board and to reflect on it over the next few days. Lord Jesus, fill us up with that love that you have shown us so that we can show that to other people. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So we're going to say goodbye to our live stream buddies, and thank you for joining us on our live streams. And I'll switch over to our
Good night, everyone.
exiting video. Yeah, good night, Peggy. Yeah, good. Just let me just kill that one off, and we'll do that. There we go. So.
Thank you, Pastor Nick. That course has just been awesome. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to
Food
get the
for
book.
thought, as they say. Yeah, food. Mm-hmm.